and he was off the field. He was just in the tunnel, and I walked past him and thinking, oh my God, I hope he doesn't remember. Like I was the referee that sent him off in the semi-final. And as I'm walking past him, he goes, hello, shakes me hand and smiles. And I'm thinking as I walk off, he mustn't remember who I was, because I wouldn't have acted like that. That's for sure. I would have wanted to strangle it, thinking I've missed the final.
Thanks for listening to the latest Beyond the Back Four podcast, available on YouTube and all podcast platforms. Subscribe now so you don't miss a single episode.
Welcome back to Beyond the Back Four. This week is a special episode and it's all about you. I am going to throw your questions that you've submitted to our mailbag to our expert panel. We've got Graeme Bailey, Kieran Maguire and Mark Clattenburg, and we've got questions from level 5 referees and armchair experts and everybody in between. If you want to send a question to the guys, then send it to beyondtheback4@grv.media. We're going to get started with the very first question. So we'll start with one for you, Mark. Are you ready? This is from Lee Clark, who says, as a level 5 referee, what advice would Mark give to anyone looking to progress through the ranks?
Good luck. No, it's I think now modern refereeing's at its real difficult moment. I feel that social media, the way football is being developed with TV companies, now we've got cameras on referees' shirt to give a fan a different perspective of the game. I think the pressures are so much more difficult than it was when I was a referee. And I feel when I was a referee, yes, we had Grassroots. My biggest problem when I was refereeing Grassroots was Sunday morning players who were Saturday afternoon players who I used to referee on a Saturday afternoon, but they were completely different animals on a Sunday. And that's because they'd been in the pub the night before, they were playing with the mates, they didn't really care. I'm not saying about the game, because on a Saturday they were getting paid, and on a Sunday, it was more of a kickabout with their mates, and they were more and more challenging. So for a young referee, refereeing in that environment, it was about survival. It was about trying to get through the 90 minutes without being abused or assaulted or, shouted at, threatened. And I think being a level 5, yes, you have some sort of protection. I just think that it's certainly a big step up that he's going to have to look at when he wants to reach the Premier League, because you have the challenges of a Premier League referee. For example, a level 5, you can go out on the streets, you can go to your local town, you can do normal things. Now you're a Premier League referee, you've got responsibilities, you've got roles, and your life changes to a point where you lose friends, you lose the chances to enjoy life like you would have when you're a level 5. But the rewards are so much bigger. It's a full-time job. And some of the stadiums that I was lucky to go to, I would never have even went as a football fan. So the chances to see wonderful places and referee some of the amazing games in the world and be a part of probably the greatest sport in the world is such a great thing. But it's a big step up from level 5. And the only advice I would give him is stay humble, work hard, and remember, your last match is irrelevant because it's the next one that's more important.
That was very nice, wholesome advice. That's not the sort of thing that normally happens on this podcast. Graeme, Kieran, did either of you ever think about qualifying, giving refereeing a go?
I did used to referee. And I was one of those referees that gave up after being attacked. I thought, I've got better things to do with my life than this.
Like physically attacked or just shouted at?
It was, I was pushed up against my car in the car park by somebody who thought I should have given an offside or something. It's some nonsense decision. But I agree with what Mark says. There's a complete difference between Saturday afternoon football, where I was sort of doing it, a county league standard and a wee bit above. It wasn't too bad. And the players and the manager had a bit of respect. Sunday morning, especially Manchester, Hough End on a Sunday morning, and places like that weren't pleasant at all.
Graeme, ever tempted?
Never tempted. I was obviously one of these failed footballers. I still held out hopes of making it in the game at one point. And then once I got to university, tasted beer, tasted journalism. No, I didn't really have a thought about refereeing.
You can fail at both. I did. I qualified as referee when I was 18 to do my little brother's team's games. And then, just all the parents were awful. So I was like, this is such a waste of my time.
It's interesting what Kieran said. I'd just refereed a Premier League match. And one of my good friends had a junior side. It was like an under-16 junior side. And he asked us, he said, Mark, look, we've got a game on a Sunday. It's a top-of-the-table clash. Could you referee the match? And I said, look, I've got a Premier League game. if I'm okay, certainly and everything works out okay, I'll referee it on the Sunday. So I went down, refereed it, and the abuse I took off a parent, it was like bordering on ridiculous. And I thought, if a young referee had to be subject to this, how would he get through it? And in the end, because I had a little bit of, experience, I just went up to the father and I just got my whistle and I just dropped it in front of him and I said, good luck, I'm off. And what the parents then did, everybody ganged up on him. They weren't going to gang up on him at first because they were all scared of him. They all ganged up because the match was going to get cancelled, and they threw him out of the state. They threw him out of the area. But I'm thinking, why should people be subject to that abuse when actually a lot of referees are doing it because they love football, they love keeping fit. Yes, they get a little bit of pocket money, but they do it because they love football. And why do we have people getting so aggressive and angry? Maybe because they want their sons to play. They've reached, high levels, so they want their sons to reach the same level. I don't know, but it seems that we've got a culture at the moment where it's really difficult for young referees. And the only way I can see it happening, we're seeing more and more academies getting developed now. And I think we've got to find a better way of bringing young referees through a system which is protected by, for example, academies where they're not subject to that abuse, and avoid the Sunday mornings where you'll always have that core of referees that will always manage them games because they like the banter, they like, going to getting a little bit of pocket money to go to the pub on a Sunday afternoon or whatever. They'll always have that. But if we want to nurture the top referees coming through, we've got to find a better system.
I agree. I could have been a top referee.
So could have I, if I'd stuck in at school.
One for you, Kieran. I've not read the question yet, but it's from Chloe in Brighton, so I think you'll like it. With so many clubs flirting with financial rules, will we ever see multiple point deductions in one season, or will it always end up in legal wrangling?
I think we could see multiple points deductions in this season. And the reason why I say that is that Leicester City are potentially up on a charge from the Premier League for the 3 years ended the 30th of June 2024. They did manage to delay those charges going through, which in hindsight was probably an error, because they'd been far better off last season taking a points deduction and finishing 19th instead of finishing 19th. It wouldn't have made any difference last season. They were so far away from being competitive. And in addition, it looks like they've had quite a tough year in the Premier League last season, so they could be on a charge from the EFL. Both the EFL and the Premier League are slightly hacked off that Leicester City's brilliant lawyer, Nick DeMarco, managed to prove that at the 30th of June 2023, I think it was, Leicester City were neither in the Premier League nor were they in the EFL, and therefore they couldn't be charged by either party. And that resulted in both of those organisations having to go and change their rule books. So never say never, but yes, I think we will see more and more legal wranglings coming through. And should Manchester City lose the 115 charges case, then I think we could see potentially dozens of claims from individual clubs who will have said, well, we would have been in the Champions League, but Manchester City cheated that season, or we would have won the Premier League, or we would have won that. And we do have a bit of precedent for it in that Everton recently paid Leeds United compensation for the year in which Everton had a points deduction. Leeds has said, whatever happened the previous season, we would have finished a wee bit higher, and so on. So if we were talking about things we should have done earlier in our lives, career-wise, I think all four of us should have qualified as sports lawyers, and we'd be recording this on our yachts.
That would be nice. I'd like that. Do you think this system is fit for purpose? Because there's so many of these conversations, and I'll talk to football fans that at grounds that you meet and so on, and so many people go so quickly to the boardroom and talk about, for example, Manchester City. If let's say they win their case and therefore legally everything they've done is sound, just like Leicester, if it's through these mad loopholes, does any of this make sense? Is anybody winning through any of this?
Well, yeah, the lawyers are winning.
Well, yeah, but football fans generally, are we winning in any of these battles?
I don't think so. I think there is a lack of transparency, and whilst it's easy to be critical of the fact that some clubs are using very, very talented lawyers to avoid prosecution or to successfully defend themselves. I think actually you've got to look at the people who are drawing up the rule books. Because if you compare the Premier League rule book to that of UEFA, it's chalk and cheese. UEFA's rule book is really robust and has been thought through and it's been stress tested. The Premier League's looks like it's been decided as something that if you staggered out of the pub at 11:30 at night on a Saturday, and what you do in between, sort of getting to between the pub and the kebab house, and it's full of loopholes. The clubs are aware of them, but the clubs don't want to change them because what we are seeing from more and more clubs, they say, well, this is a potential get out of jail free card. So the sale of the women's team, which Chelsea are allowed to do under the Premier League rules, and they're allowed to sell car parks to themselves. You're not allowed to do that in UEFA's rules because it's a related party transaction and it's deemed to be independent. The player swaps that we saw 12 months ago remember the last week of June 2024, that was clubs gaming the system because the rule book is very weak. So I can understand fans' frustration, but I think there's a broader issue of poor governance and leadership from the Premier League, although I do have sympathy for Richard Masters because he can't change the rules unless 14 clubs vote to do that, and turkeys don't vote for Christmas.
They certainly don't. Graeme and Mark, obviously you're football fans. God, look like you were going to say something there, Graeme.
Yeah, I've had this question. Obviously, I apologise, Kieran, if it's just pure stupidity. But from the Newcastle and Villa point and the PSR, Kieran, and I do get the odd Newcastle fan asking me this, and Villa as well, why doesn't one season, so say this summer, say Newcastle, right, we're sick of this, we don't want to lose Elliot Andersons again, we don't want to have to sell anyone. Why don't Newcastle just have one summer where they spend £500 million, get their squad into world-class condition, and then for 1 year take the penalties, but then after taking, whenever they get the penalties, is it all done and dusted then? Or does it keep going, Kieran? Can they have one summer, spend £500 million, they assemble a squad which is fit for purpose for 5 years, then they have one season of penalties, say they get a 20-point deduction, who cares, they'll survive it. Is it all done and dusted then? Can that work? Could that happen?
Well, because you were assessed, Graham, over a rolling 3-year period, there is the potential for double or in fact triple jeopardy. So let's say that Newcastle spent £1 billion in the summer of 2025, and say, well, we've worked out what the penalties will be, and we think we can survive that, and we can put it in a realistic company. They could end up with a points deduction this season, but then if they don't sell players in the summer of 2026, they end up with a points deduction in 26-27 because the spending this year counts for 3 years' worth of assessment. And remember, on top of that, you've got to comply with UEFA's rules. And one of the things that the Premier League does now ask clubs to do is, if they are concerned, is they have to put together a budget. But my argument has been on many occasions is that if a new owner comes in and wants to spend the money, show us the money. Put that money into a bank account. So not just this year's wages, but next year's wages and the wages too. If you want to go above a certain limit, and what do we want? We want, doesn't matter who the club is, we want that club to survive. So I think there are ways and means around it. Or if a club does want to go and spend an extreme amount of money, what do? You have a super tax. We have that. I think it's in MLB or NBA in the United States and in China. Yep. And spend above a certain limit, and you pay, and I would set that super tax at 500%. So if you want to go and spend an extra £1 billion, it's going to cost you £5 billion, but that £5 billion of super tax, half of it goes to the Premier League, half of it goes to Grassroots and the EFL, and who's the loser? The players will get big wages, as we've seen with Liverpool spending an incredible amount of money this summer. Just because you sign all the players doesn't mean that it gels. And again, you look at PSG when they had Neymar and Messi and so on, that it didn't work for them in Europe because it's about a team, and a team is far more than a collection of very expensive individuals.
I think from my side, the fans' point of view, I think as a fan, when you get an owner coming into your football club, you think everything's going to change, don't you? You think this is it, and we're going to be able to buy this player, we're going to buy that player. I just feel as a Newcastle fan, everybody feels that the big four, the big six, have already had an advantage before the PSR rules because they had big squads. And it was interesting. Why did Chelsea kept buying 30, 40 players? Probably they were all stockpiling, knowing probably what was going to happen, because it feels they're already ahead and they've already got a good squad that they can spend maybe only 200 million, 300 million to make good additions. But like Aston Villa and Newcastle, who want to reach that level, have to try and spend even more. And because everybody thinks you've got money, the transfer fee goes up. Everybody wants more. The player wants more. And it feels like the smaller clubs who want to compete against the big clubs cannot. And it doesn't seem to be any solution, regardless of what happens, that the big four, big six, or whatever they are always going to be ahead of the game.
I absolutely agree with you. Villa, Newcastle, I could throw Forest in there, potentially Everton with the new owners as well. Those clubs are on the wrong side of history, because what did Chelsea do when Abramovich came in? I've got a spreadsheet in front of me with their wage bill, and it just goes up like a rocket in the seasons after Abramovich arrived. And if those players didn't work out, then just go and say, let's go and play for the reserves. You're on 120 grand a week. You got the lifestyle. So there was no PSR pressure. It was exactly the same when Sheikh Mansour came into Manchester City. I think it was in 2011, just before PSR came through, or FFP. Manchester City lost £200 million in a year, but it didn't matter because there was no cost control. If Newcastle or Villa tried to replicate that, they would be caught by the system. And sort of the cynic in me says that the big six clubs said, well, 6 into 4 doesn't go as far as Champions League places are concerned. Let's do our utmost to ensure that 6 doesn't become a 7 or 8 or a 9, because we want those guaranteed monies. And that's what the purpose of Super League was. You didn't have to win. You didn't have to worry. You automatically qualified. It was absolutely terrible for football, but really good for the owners in terms of profits and making money. So, yeah, I think I've got huge sympathy for Newcastle and Villa owners and fans, because they can't do what other clubs have done historically.
I'm going to change the narrative, but ever so slightly, with another question. This one's for you, Graeme. This is from Tom in Leeds, who says, how early do clubs really start working on summer transfers? Which I think sort of still plays into what we're talking about in terms of the finances and planning. But from your perspective, just as a recruitment exercise, when does that come in?
Well, it's interesting, Tom from Leeds. Leeds' summer planning was very different to a lot of Premier League clubs, because they had a Championship list and a Premier League list. So they were working on two different areas at the same time, if we stay in the Championship or if we get promoted. And yeah, generally teams are planning 12 months in advance, and even ahead of that sometimes. And it's tough. They like to put things in place, and even now I could tell you a few loan deals that are already in place with Premier League clubs. Yeah, in this small time frame, does that player start playing again for the team, Sam? Does he change his mind and stuff like that? That's why the summer window is so important to these teams, and it's why we'll see only a bit of reactionary in January. But the summer window is huge, and we saw that with Liverpool. I think Liverpool is the real whether we think it was good or bad. Last January, wrote a few stories at a time saying Liverpool were not planning to do anything in January. They had their plans in place to do the summer. And if you remember, Kvashvili came on the market in January, and the Liverpool fans were begging for the club to do him, but FSG stuck to the plot. They knew what they were doing. And it came to this summer, and they had a blockbuster summer. They broke the British transfer record twice and spent, Kieran will say it was over $250 million, well over $250 million Liverpool spent in the end. So yeah, generally in the Premier League, Sam, because it's very different for the EFL. EFL teams don't plan that far in advance, they really don't. Some of the clubs towards the top do, the ones who need the Premier League, so like a Middlesbrough, for instance, my Middlesbrough, they will have a Premier League budget in mind and a Championship one, like Leeds did. But yeah, the summer now is purely for Premier League. They are planning now, they're doing it. Liverpool are planning now, and they've got the added pressure of do we keep Konate? Is he going to leave on a free transfer? So they've got to do loads of different scenarios, Sam, where what if X, Y, and Z happens? Do we do this? And there's clubs as well. Your club are one of them, Sam, Manchester United, who are planning what happens if we change manager as well. And there's lots of different scenarios clubs are planning for. It's not just one. They're planning all sorts of scenarios.
And what makes it even better, if you look at Sunderland, for example, what you've just said, Sunderland didn't even qualify for the Premier League till after the playoffs, which nobody expected them to actually win the playoffs. And then you see what they recruited in their summer was an incredible achievement compared to, you can plan 6 months in advance, but nowhere Sunderland ever thought they were ready to go into the Premier League. So, some clubs can just, with their directors of football, it seems to be now, these directors of football are the ones that are looking at players and having all of the jigsaw puzzles ready just to fit in if the scenarios are right.
And Kieran, if we look at the Premier League table, Arsenal at the top, Wolves are at the bottom. What kind of planning do Wolves do? At what point do they, financially, do they go, we should give up on thinking about Premier League players? We should focus all of our attention on the likelihood is that we're going to suffer relegation. And for an Arsenal, if they win the Premier League, at what point do they go, well, what's the player? Who's the player? How do we take ourselves to the next place? How do we make sure we're winning the Champions League, etc.? Do they do that at this point, or do they have to wait? Because the money involved is massive.
Well, from Arsenal's point of view, it's all about top 4 / top 5. It's about qualifying for the Champions League. And that's why I think we've seen so much expenditure in the last few windows, because there are now these challenger clubs, the likes of Villa and Newcastle, who have managed to qualify for the Champions League. And also the fact that potentially you can get into the Champions League from finishing 5th or even 6th. So we are seeing an increase in the budgets, and that's partly due to the fact that the rewards of the Champions League have accelerated since the introduction of the Swiss model. So Arsenal are already doing their plans. They all have their storyboards where we say, right, this player we think is, he's going to be 28, 29. We're looking perhaps to reduce his number of matches. And they will have targeted their players, or they will certainly have done some observations. At the other end of the table, I think it does come down to the culture of the owners. Now, I think with Wolves and Fosun, there is an issue. You talk to Wolves fans. I was there a couple of weeks ago to see them play Brighton, and I think it's fair to say that the fan base was pretty delusioned with the owners because there doesn't seem to be an enthusiasm to recruit. So therefore, the owners might say, we're going to jump ship in effect, and we're not going to recruit in January. If the manager can persuade the director of football, who in turn can persuade the board of directors, that getting relegated means you're going from £110 million to 45, and actually you're better off, twisting on 19, as we sometimes say, if you're playing blackjack, in the hope that you can make that difference, then perhaps Wolves might be looking to recruit. And I can assure you, if that is the case, they will have already identified the positions and the players now, because negotiations start informally in November and December, if not earlier.
Okay. Got another question. This one I'm going to throw at you, Mark, because I think it's funny. It is from Luke Thrower, which is funny also because I said throw at you. As you can tell, I think a lot of things are funny. Ever had an awkward encounter with a player off the pitch?
Oof. I tell you what, it was the little story was off the pitch. He wasn't in the match day squad, but I remember of a scenario. I was refereeing Benfica Juventus semi-final of the Europa League, and I remember a player called Lazar Markovic. And if anybody remember him, he went on to play for Liverpool. And in this semi-final, it was probably his last game for Benfica last European game for Benfica, because he got substituted. And after he got substituted, 5 minutes, near the end of the game, there was a mass confrontation in the technical area. So I went across, I sent off a player from Juventus, and I remember Lako Markovic being right in front of us, even though he was should have been in the technical area. So I gave him a red card because there was all sorts going on. So at the end of the match report went in. It didn't affect the game because he was already off the pitch, so it wasn't like Benfica got reduced or Juventus got reduced. But both players would serve a potential suspension if they qualified for European competitions the following season. But with Lazar Markovic, he was going to miss the final because Benfica was successful against Juventus. So there was a hearing because he appealed. They looked at the video footage and also took in together my report, and they decided that he was guilty, that he did leave the the stand to come down and was involved in the mass confrontation. So he missed the final. And I'm thinking, oh my God, as a human being, I thought, this chance for a player to play in a European final, and it's probably my fault. Okay, I did my job, but I felt a little bit sentimental that, damn, he's got involved in something like this. And it was interesting, the following season he signs for, at the start of the following season in 2015, he signs for Liverpool. And I was refereeing Liverpool's very first game, which was against Southampton at home. And he was off the field. He was just in the tunnel. And I walked past him and thinking, oh my God, I hope he doesn't remember. Like I was the referee that sent him off in the semi-final. And as I'm walking past him, he goes, hello, shakes me hand and smiles. And I'm thinking as I walk off, he mustn't remember who I was, because I wouldn't have acted like that. That's for sure. I would have wanted to strangle us, thinking I've missed the final.
Maybe he did though. Maybe that's how he was letting you know.
But I don't even think he could. I don't even think he recognised us. So it was like weird that, because I would have remembered, because I remember everything, and I remember that he was playing, but he couldn't remember, probably because I was only a referee. But I was the referee that had put him out, like suspended him for the semi-final, quite rightly so. But I still would have had a little bit of like argument, thinking you've stopped me playing in one of the most important European finals. But he just said hi, and that was it, and shook me hand. I'm sure he couldn't remember who I was.
Kieran, Graeme, any awkward encounters with players?
I won't be able to name it because someone's still involved. I've had a few nasty WhatsApp messages and voicemails about certain stories we've done, and then it's always one to what we get a lot of these. A lot of journalists will get these saying, "Why have you done that?" And say, "Well, it's true." We say, "Yeah, but you could have asked me about it." Saying, "Well, if I asked you about it, you wouldn't have told me anyway." So,
I once created an awkward encounter. I think I was walking along a beach with a friend of mine and bumped into the Brazilian Ronaldo, El Phenomenon. Just met him on the beach. And so, yeah, had like a chat with him for like 2 minutes, like asked him why he didn't play for Man United, etc. Did all the obvious mad things I did, and then let him go. And then as he walked off, me and my mate were just like, Ronaldo, we've just met Ronaldo, just thinking, this is amazing. And then this group of like maybe 16-year-old girls just comes out of nowhere and just runs over. And there's like 10 of them. And they're like, did you just meet Ronaldo? Did you meet Ronaldo? And we're like, yes. They go, where is he? So we point, like, he's just walked down there. And then they just run. And he's in a group. So there's no way they wouldn't have caught that group demanding to meet Ronaldo, but presumably are only aware of Cristiano. So I think I would have created an awkward encounter, but such is life. I'll do one more question and then we're going to run out of time. So this one, I think you'll enjoy it. It's another one from Mark, but I think you'll all enjoy it. Mark, this is from Mark Marston, who says, who's the most challenging Everton player you've ever refereed?
I wouldn't say like difficult player, but he was like just intimidating. It was Duncan Ferguson. And I remember refereeing him a few times, and if a player caught him in the air with an elbow, he would come and say, Mark, look, if you don't solve it, I'll solve it. And you're thinking, oh my God, it was, but he had this way about him, which he had a good sense of humor, and he was such a nice guy. He wasn't a guy who would abuse, but he had this way, and you knew when the ball was getting played up, it was arms, the defenders are trying to get at him, maybe wind him up. And it was just a really challenging, and it was, some players were like that, and it was always the tall players. Peter Crouch, when he used to come on for Stoke, Peter Crouch is one of the nicest guys you meet. But as a referee, you think, oh, yes, Peter Crouch is coming off the bench. You know what's going to happen? A Rory Delap, a long throw into the penalty area, and you're thinking, here we go again.
So the obvious follow-up question is, and also at Middlesbrough and Brighton.
No, Middlesbrough, come on. I never refereed well at Middlesbrough, but even though it's not far from where I live, I think Middlesbrough, I remember there was some good guys at Middlesbrough. I remember like people like Johnny Woodgate, and players who were very experienced and probably, the chat to you before the game, probably try to befriend you and make your life easier, because I've always find the experienced pros were the clever ones. They were thinking, why fight with the referee? Why abuse the referee? Because you know what? If we're nice to them, we might get something. I think the young guys never cottoned onto that. They used to try and abuse you, try and, get into your skin, and it never worked because they never got the benefit of the doubt.
And Brighton?
I remember Crystal Palace Brighton quickly, and it was the playoff game. And it was when, there was Poirier and what do you call him? Who was a Crystal Palace manager? Holloway at the time. And I'd gone into the dressing room, Are you going past the dressing room? There was no problems with the dressing rooms. The kit men were in the dressing rooms as well. Everything was normal. And then you hear a commotion before the game that, you know, there was stuff put on the wall of Crystal Palace's dressing room, you know, and you're thinking, how could that have happened? How could that have happened? And probably it's what we call maybe reverse psychology, getting under your own players' skins to get the best out of them. And it did, because then Crystal Palace ended up beating Brighton in their stadium to qualify for the playoff final.
I'm sorry that came up there, Kieran. That I feel responsible. Yeah, we're ending on that sour note for you. Guys, thank you very much. If you've got a question, make sure you send it in to beyondtheback4@grv.media. You can ask anything you like. We'll do more episodes like this. Make sure you are subscribed. You can be subscribed on YouTube. Get in the comments below. You can ask questions there as well. We'll find them. And make sure you are subscribed across all podcast platforms, because we enjoy your interaction with the show. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the latest Beyond the Back Four podcast, available on YouTube and all podcast platforms. Subscribe now so you don't miss a single episode.